There's something I've been wanting to talk about that has been somewhat concerning to me. And I call it an identification crisis. And it has to do with all the violence we're seeing in the world today. And somehow it seems so obvious to me, but so difficult to communicate, that it has so much to do with identification. Identification as a Jew, as a Palestinian, a Russian, a Ukrainian, a Democrat, a Republican, a Christian, a Muslim. Those are various authoritarian principles. They have their basic ideas of how we should live and what we should do and what we shouldn't do to have a peaceful life together, to exist together peacefully. But yet these identification, our attachment to these identifications, although they're formed in the sense to bring security, they get threatened. We get threatened by other people's ideas about how we should live and how we shouldn't live. And we fight wars over them. If you took the Dalai Lama and switched the Dalai Lama when he was 3 years old with Trump when he was 3 years old, and switched their environments, the Dalai Lama ends up with the Trump family, and Trump ends up in the monastery. You think they're going to be the same people? You think they're going to identify with the same ideology? With the same principles? Or are they going to be totally different people? Doesn't it seem that we're totally conditioned by our environment, by our social structure, as to our identities, who we think we are? I mean, these identities are there is a self there. When the identity is threatened, the self is threatened. The body even feels threatened. And maybe it could be really, you can see what's happening in the world. So what do we do to prevent? I mean, this is creating an awful lot of divisiveness and division. Look at the divisions in our country right now between Democratic and Republican, and those identifications. It's getting harder and harder to live together. Just like it's getting harder and harder for the Palestinians and the Israelis to live together. Are those identifications who we really are? We're so attached to them. We didn't even decide to be those identifications, did we?
Om Purvaswaha Tatsavitur.
Aren't these identifications causing conflict and insecurity? Not security for sure. As we identify as a Christian or a Muslim, is that creating security? Or is it creating, again, division, divisiveness, and conflict? Where's the root of this identification? And that might be really deep down inside of who we are not who we are. Because those identifications, it seems to me, are just in our heads. They're just created by the thought system. They don't exist anywhere else. Who are we behind all that thinking and identification? If we could drop all of that, who would we be? If you're not a Muslim, a Catholic, a Democrat, a Republican, then who are you? Is there an essence there where we all exist as equals, undifferentiated? Not wanting each other to be a certain way according to our principles, according to our identification. I know. We think that if we don't have these principles and these identifications, then what do we have? Let's see if we can get. This is going to be a tough one to get to the root of what's creating these identifications. And I hope this doesn't sound too abstract, but let's stop. Let's go back in time, thousands of years maybe, where thought in the human being was just spontaneously responding to various environmental cues. And in that was all potential. The potential for the possibility of any thought to appear. And one of those thoughts was something like this. Those are my thoughts. Well, now that's a sticky one, and it has a lot of implications. If it's believed in, and it is a thought, and it is an assumption, but if that thought / assumption is believed in, then the indication is there is a thinker of the thought. Not that it's actual, but it is a thought, an assumption, which is believed in. I believe in myself as a thinker of the thought. That's a belief in, an identification with the thinker. The first identification, which has separated itself from the thought process. A thought has just separated itself from itself. And it's believed in. It thinks it has control over the thought process. It's responsible for how well it does with the thinking process, or maybe how stupid it is. There's a lot of emotions now that can come up in all that. But that whole system relies upon division. It can't exist without division. Not only does it think it has control over thought and it's thinking the thoughts, but it also thinks it is aware. It is what's aware. Now, this thought, this assumption, now has taken on the volition of awareness, observation, attention. Those are my feelings, my awareness, my attention, my thoughts. There's an identification with thought now. And it has ideas about how it should be and how it shouldn't be. It acquires a whole persona. Bad actor, good actor, spiritual. A Jew, a Muslim, a Democrat, a Republican, Ukrainian, you get the picture. And it's a very, very divisive one. It is creating human suffering. If we're projecting now the idea that that is what's causing human suffering, then we want to end that identification. But what is it that is hearing this? Is it the thinker of the thought that is hearing this? Assessing this from its various belief systems and identifications? Is that what's listening? Does that listen at all? What does it hear? It's listening through its identification. As a Jew, as a Muslim, as a Catholic, a Protestant? What's the reality from those different perspectives? And what do you hear from those different perspectives? You hear according to those different perspectives. Can we get out of that? Can we be clear of that? Can that which thinks it is the thinker of the thought, the one who has volition, the one who has intelligence, can that see its own predicament? Looking through all of its identifications, can it see clearly what's happening? But the big deal is, if we're looking at the thinking process and what the thinking process has created within ourselves, and it's the thinking process that is looking at the thinking process, if thought is observing thought, can it see itself? Can it understand itself? As it divides itself to see itself, can it really see itself? Can there be a seeing that whole process as it divides itself from, can we say, from outside itself? Is there something that is seeing, awareness, innate intelligence that can become aware or have an insight into this condition, and that very insight be a change, a shift in the condition? To see how it's created this blind spot. Let's back up a little. A child is born, very young. The child is being. It is aliveness. It is intelligence. Even before there is the first inkling of a thought, everything is being sorted out in that innate intelligence, that awareness. The child is aware without the thinker, without the thought, without reflection. The child can't reflect on itself and say, I'm aware, I'm alive. There's just the knowing, the innate knowing and intelligence of being alive. There's aliveness there. There's feelings, senses working, and it's all being put together. The child is learning how to center itself in the body, where its body ends, and how to navigate the world. There's already intelligence there that doesn't need thought. Isn't that? Eventually, thought comes in. And his sort of a metaphor for what can happen. You know how we often will sit down with a child when they're very young. We'll have a book with a picture of a bunch of animals. We'll sit down and turn the pages looking at different animals and pointing to them and labeling them, etc. Well, when you do that, you ask the child, what kind of animal is that? Well, the child hasn't got a name for it, right? But the child sees the animal. It has long ears and a puffy tail. Cute as anything. And the child knows that animal. If it's seen the animal again, it would recognize it. And then the parent asks, what is that? And the kid, of course, shrugs. I don't know. It's a rabbit. Say rabbit. And the kid says, rabbit. Now you know what it is. See, now you know. You have a name for it. Naming, labeling, and thought is the knowing, is the intelligence. You don't know anything until you can label it. It might have been better if we looked at the animal and said, Look at that animal. Take a good look at it. Let's watch a movie of the animal and see how it runs and what it eats, etc., etc. And through that observation, through that awareness, you know that animal. When you see it again, you'll recognize it. But we need a name for it. So when you see it again, you can tell me what you saw. And we call it a rabbit. We're not pointing, in doing that, we're not pointing to the intelligence being identified with thought. We're pointing to the intelligence of awareness itself, which was always there. Now, is that what needs to come to see the human predicament we have created in the name and the identification with the thought system and the incorrect assumption that there's someone here who has control over it? Can we see? Can we observe with the eyes of a young child?
Om Purvaswaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi